Good morning, Lubbock and West Texas. Welcome to the program this morning. This is the Wake Up Call. If you're just joining us, happy Tuesday, everybody. 79 degrees outside right now, and you heard it from KCBD meteorologist. Going to be another hot one today. He said 104. I saw locally other places saying 102. Either way, hot is hot after setting a record for the year yesterday at 106. So stay cool out there. Stay hydrated. As promised, we have now Abilene banker James Arnold joins us here on the program over the phone lines. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Benji. It was 108 in Abilene yesterday. Just report again.
You got no sympathy for us down here in Lubbock. Yeah, like I said, hot is hot. Other than the heat, how is Abilene? You been there how long?
I'm on my third month. It's been great. Town's really been very welcoming and very excited to have us here, and we're excited to be here. Miss Lubbock. We were in Lubbock 29 years.
Yeah,
and,
wow.
Never really thought we'd be in Lubbock that long, and never really thought we would be leaving in the summer of 2026, but here we are. So, but it's been great. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no, and give us a little bit of background. You're running a bank operation there. How many branches? Remind me of the name.
It's Clear Fork Bank.
Yeah, Clear Fork.
Been around since 1883. Mm-hmm. Originally was chartered as First National Bank of Albany in Albany, Texas, and we're in Abilene, Albany, Breckenridge, and Mineral Wells, and probably by this time next year, we may be in a couple other locations, so you never know. But
sure.
We're right at $1 billion bank, so we're just a small community bank, and we do kind of what small community banks do, which is a lot of real estate and a lot of home builders we bank. And for what's going on in Abilene and Albany, we seem to be at the right place at the right time. And it's just it's a very interesting market right now in Abilene.
Yeah,
it's boom time.
I was going to say, what a time to be in banking in Abilene. You obviously you spent almost 30 years in Lubbock. You've got a front row seat to Abilene's ongoing data center build out. From your perspective, what's the biggest economic change you've personally observed? I know you were watching the Abilene market, well before you landed there. But what change have you personally observed in Abilene that you would attribute directly or indirectly to data centers?
Well, I can tell you personally, the housing and the cost of housing has affected us personally, obviously, because we're looking to relocate, buy a house. And so this data center, it reminds me, I grew up in Odessa, Midland, and so it reminds me of the boom time in the oil business in Odessa in the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Austin in 2021, post-COVID, just the rapid, frantic housing market that's going on here and just crazy things happening. Home builders in this market cannot put up houses fast enough. They're selling houses before they pour the slab. I mean, wow. It's crazy. And so, the average price per square foot right now is approaching $190 a foot for Abilene.
Wow.
And I'll just give you some comparison. Lubbock's about 150 on the high end. I mean, it's probably 140, 150 per square foot in Lubbock. It's 190 in Abilene today. And so it's crazy. The rental market here is crazy. They're getting $1,000 a room. So if you've got a 3-bedroom house out of the gate, don't worry about the condition of it. You're going to get $1,000 a room, so you're $3,000. Some people are getting $1,000 a man, and so they're putting 2 men in each room. So if you've got a 4-bedroom house, you've got 8 men living in there renting that thing from you. You're getting $8,000 a month.
Wow.
So the problem that's going to create is that unless you're putting that money back in a reserve account, because those guys are going to tear the place up. It's not built for 8 men to live in, and so the refurb when those guys move out and move on is going to be it's going to be interesting. Hotels, you've got, Abilene leads the state in average daily rate, ADR. That's a statistic that people track and hoteliers track, bankers track it. Our ADR is higher than Austin, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio. I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
So from a banker's perspective, James, does say a $5 billion, $10 billion data center investment behave like a traditional economic development, or is it fundamentally different because so much of the capital is concentrated in specialized buildings, et cetera?
It's different in the sense that we've not seen, Lubbock certainly hasn't seen, it would be like if Texas Tech University went from 100 students to 30,000 students in 24 months.
Right.
Just a rapid, when you go out on the data center side, they're constructing the buildings that are going to house the computers. They're hauling in the equipment that goes in the building while they're building the roads to get you to that building. So you've got 18-wheelers hauling equipment, you've got road building equipment, you've got gravel haulers all in the same line trying to get on site. And so the speed at which these things are going up, and there's 200 or 300 on the drawing board today. Abilene or Albany's looking, they've got another data center. They've sold the ranch. It'd be data center number 3 for this region.
Right.
They're negotiating with the county, and luckily Albany has some very smart people that are kind of representing and looking out for Shackelford County. Uh-huh. They're negotiating to set up a decommissioning fund, so when these data centers move on, they've got a fund set up to help kind of decommission the thing, to kind of break it all down and put it back the way it was before they got here. Decommissioning
being another word for mild crash.
Yeah, dismantling. Because think about it. The computing power continues to evolve, and so who knows? 5 years, 3 years, are they going to need 12 to 24 buildings the size of 8 football fields to do this computing power, or can they do it, on the size of a laptop? I don't know, but we've seen technology you and I have in our lifetime evolve from these massive computers to now our iPhone has more computing power than those PCs did.
Right.
So who knows where it goes, how fast it gets there.
Yeah, I think the speed in which things happen is incredibly fascinating, especially when you look at it affecting every aspect of the economy. Abilene officials have pointed out that some of the recent sales tax surge is essentially a construction cycle revenue, while property tax growth is more, obviously reoccurring. Does that distinction matter when you're evaluating the health of a local economy?
It does. From a banking perspective, think about the savings and loan industry back in the late 70s, early 80s. They were loaning money along, going 30 years for mortgages, and they were pricing deposits short. 1 year CD, 2 year CD, but they're loaning money for 30 years. It's kind of like this data center stuff. From a banking perspective, you want to make a guy a 7 or 10 year loan on something that, the useful life is maybe 18 months or 2 years, because these data centers are going to build it and move on to the next one. And so there's some mismatches in the economy.
Right.
Housing, people are paying $185, $200 a foot for houses, $300 a foot. And in 18 months, is that demand still going to be there to command those prices? Austin's going through that right now in kind of a readjustment of housing, and they lead the country in price reduction, sellers over buyers, that whole mismatch. And I think, if communities like Abilene or whoever aren't careful, they're going to end up with, some pretty big mismatches in their economy when these data centers move on and they get built.
Interesting. Good perspective. James, will you stick around next break? We've got lots more to ask you.
Yeah, you bet.
Back after this, more with James Arnold, Abilene, a Lubbock banker turned Abilene banker, giving us perspective on the data center, consequences, benefits, et al. We'll be back on the other side. Stay with us.
Wake Up Call with Benji Snead continues on 92.3 The Hub, the voice for freedom.
Welcome back to the program, 7:50 a.m. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday. You're listening to the Wake Up Call. Benji Snead here along with producer Brendan Riker. Looking for a high today of 102 to 104-ish after setting a record yesterday at 106 here in Lubbock. But those folks down in Abilene don't feel sorry for us. It was 108 there, according to our guest this morning, James Arnold. Good morning again, James.
Hey, Benji, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Want to ask you a few things about perspective. Not that we want to necessarily make a direct comparison to Lubbock versus Abilene, but obviously one can be made in terms of data centers. You talked about this, I forget the word you used, but what happens when the dust settles, the temporary construction jobs are gone, we don't have the need for housing. I know the numbers will change, but what should Abilene be doing that also Lubbock could observe in advance of a build out being done to protect and or insulate the economy?
The speed and pace at which these things are going up. I mean, you could drive by the data center south of Albany right now, and that one's behind. There's another data center northwest of Abilene. That's about 80% complete. The one by Albany is probably 50% complete. And the number of cranes in the air, of course, they're working on it 24/7. There's lights for at night. The number of cranes in the air are probably 20. So the speed at which these things go up, I'm not sure what a community could do other than negotiate, like we talked about earlier, that decommissioning. So when these things move on and we don't need it, technology's changed, and we can do it a different way. How do we dismantle these massive, data centers that have 20, 30 buildings the size of 4 or 5 football fields each? How do we tear those things down and go back to the way it was and put the ranch back together, so to speak? Other than that, I'm not really sure. They just blow in here like a tornado. And, we talked about the housing and the lodging and all that, but,
right.
The airport's looking about expanding. Traffic in the communities, just, there's traffic everywhere, particularly on the north side of town. Windshield repair guys. I had a guy in the bank the other day. He owns a windshield repair business. His business is up 80% from last year because all these gravel trucks running around. Yeah. And he said, I've got a 3-week backlog today. And so every part of the economy. And so what's the positive of this, and I'm trying to be as neutral as I can. The positive of this is you're seeing transformational wealth created into Abilene. Maybe not generational wealth created, but certainly people's lives are being changed for the better.
Life-changing money,
guys that have the bus service, guys that have, we talked about the porta potties earlier in the summer, all of those kind of businesses that are connected. You've got journeyman electricians making, $300,000-$400,000 a year. I mean, crazy stuff like this are happening that's positive for the community. The tax base for whether it's Taylor County, Shackelford County, they're going to see a spike in revenue, and hopefully these community leaders will invest in infrastructure and things like that, and not put this temporary money in programs and things like that requires an annual commitment.
Right.
Because it's going to surge, and then it'll go back down to somewhere, whatever normal looks like. And you just don't want to spend all this or commit all these dollars that may not be there in 10 years. Yeah,
makes sense. From a banking perspective, I know enough about banking to get myself in trouble, but I do know essentially a bank takes deposits and makes loans. And, a chunk of your business is on, the interest that you charge, but you also pay interest out for certain deposits. You talk about the trickle-down effect. Has this data center boom had an effect on loan rates, deposits versus loans?
We've seen, yes, it's affected both sides of that ledger. We've seen an increase in deposits from our customers that are home builders, that are electricians, that, have some type of business tied to that data center. And just about every small business in town is somewhere tied directly or indirectly to that. The guy that has the tire company,
right?
He's selling tires. So it's affected that. It's affected loan demand. our guys in Abilene and really all of our markets, but particularly our Abilene guys, are just we ran out of parking spaces the other day on a Friday at 3:30.
Yeah.
Usually it's a ghost town over there at Friday at 3:30, but not in Abilene. We couldn't park anybody else, and so we're looking at expanding our parking lot over there because we continue to have that issue because we got guys coming in and out all the time, making deposits, getting the whole deal.
Yeah.
Abilene has seen nothing like this, I would argue, in their history.
Oh, easily.
And so, but we're not the only ones. There's 248 data centers on the books trying to get approved in Texas.
Right.
There's 335 on the ground today. And so you've got communities like right near Granbury in Hood County. I think they've got 6 or 7 data centers either under construction or operating. And so the scary part is the pull on the electrical grid. You know, you've got the Permian Basin needing additional energy.
Right.
You've got about 2,000 people in line to get plugged into ERCOT. And now they're talking about rolling blackouts for West Texas next summer. And so, you know, they've got to solve this energy question, or you and I and our families and our businesses are going to suffer from these rolling blackouts when it's 106 degrees or 108.
Right. Yeah, and that's part of the category I would put into the unknowns, because so far I think the positives far outweigh whatever negatives may be, but the point being, we don't know what the negatives are going to be yet, what the long-term effects are going to be, because you got to deal with the temporary construction and the initial surge of building one in the beginning. Do you think, you were talking about 240 requests across the state, looking at what you're looking at in Abilene, having lived in Lubbock for so many years, almost 3 decades in business, is Lubbock behind, or are we smart to be cautious?
I think Lubbock's smart to be cautious. I mean,
yeah.
It sure would feel good. You know, if you're a guy that owns 10 or 11 rent houses in Lubbock, and you're going, man, I can get $1,000 a room or $1,000 a man, sign me up for that.
Right.
It's sexy. It sounds great, and the short term gain is fantastic. But what's it going to do to our water supply? You know, Lubbock's done such a good job planning for a long-term water solution. You know,
no question.
Jim Gilbreth and David Miller and all those guys that served on city council back in the day really were forethought in securing long-term water rights for Lubbock. I would hate to see that be, you know, kind of diverted to 2 or 3 data centers in Lubbock, and we celebrate the surge into our tax rolls and all that, but we impact our water quality, we impact our water supply, we impact, you know, we got rolling blackouts. I mean, there's some consequences to these data centers that I don't know that we've realized them yet.
Yeah, that's kind of my point as well. In terms of, and you may not have a lot of detail here, we got about a minute before the break, but I want to ask you coming up after the break, James, about incentives. How does the community feel about using tax money to get them here when they're competing, when they're basically beating down the door? I'll ask you about that after the break. More with James Arnold at the top of the hour, 7:59 a.m. You're listening to the Wake Up Call. More with James Arnold and Abilene Data Centers on the other side.
Wake Up Call with Benji Snead continues on 92.3 The Hub, the voice for freedom.
Good morning, Lubbock and West Texas. Welcome back to the program. You're listening to the Wake Up Call. It's 8:06 a.m. Happy Tuesday, everybody. 79 degrees out there right now, on our way to 102. Some forecasts say 104. As we've mentioned, that comes after yesterday's record for the year, high for the year at 106. So stay hydrated, stay cool out there, especially workers that have to work out in the heat. Make sure we remind folks about all of that. And remember, you can do some things inside your house to keep your costs down. Experts say raise your thermostat 4 degrees if you're not going to be home. Make sure your fans are blowing counterclockwise. That pushes the cold air down, and not clockwise. That does the opposite. I've learned that recently. Visiting with James Arnold this morning. He has given us a unique perspective, probably one of the most unique perspectives, having been in Lubbock for 30 years. in the banking industry, and then now moving to Abilene, doing the same, watching all this incredible growth there. James, welcome back.
Thanks, Benji.
For the break, I was going to ask you about tax incentives. Two-part question. Has Abilene offered incentives to these data centers, and how should the community think about handing out tax dollars to this industry?
I think the script has flipped. If you think back 2 years ago, and you run the tape from the governor of Texas, he's on stage saying we've got to do these data centers. Texas is going to lead the nation. We got to do this to compete with the Chinese. And so now he's flipped it, and he's like, we got to do an audit. We got to check on this, and they're going to dig their, they've totally gone politician, and whatever way the wind's blowing is the way they're going to do. And it's disappointing that they've kind of done this. And so I think you're going to see communities really negotiate a little bit harder for these data centers to come in their communities rather than roll out the red carpet and throw a bunch of incentives at them and tax abatements. I think those days are gone.
Right.
And I think they're going to start negotiating a little harder. If you're going to come in our community, here's what you're going to be doing. You're going to repair it's almost like when the oil companies come in and they do a big drill on, they'll do 8 wells on someone's property. And part of the contract is you got to repair the roads and do all this stuff when you leave. And so I think you're going to see some of that start negotiating with these data centers rather than roll out and say, man, we'll abate these taxes for 20 years and all that. We're not abating nothing. We're going to make sure that you pay your fair share and then pay for all the damage you're going to do on our roads and in our communities.
So that they're an advantage for the community. I think in that way, Lubbock is at an advantage being able to sit back and watch this thing evolve in terms of how they're structured. If you stripped away, the headlines, look what's really happening inside the community, inside a bank. Would you say, all things being equal, that Abilene is actually, this is kind of a different form of a question I've already asked you, but Abilene is actually outperforming Lubbock economically right now?
Oh, yeah, I think so. It's boom time. And I think, the short term, it's fantastic. Like I told you earlier, it's transformational wealth is being created in this community. I mean, there's no if you need a job, there's a job available. And whether that's at a fast food restaurant that's got, I drove home from work last night, and there was a Dairy Queen on my way to the house. I counted 7 cars in the drive-thru at 7 o'clock on a Monday night at a Dairy Queen. I mean, and everywhere you look, there's just traffic and cars. And so short term, it's really great for this economy. What we don't know is what are the effects on electricity, ERCOT, water, and air quality. We don't know. And so it may be a non-issue, but there's a lot of unknowns out there. And I don't know that the data centers know at this point what the long-term effects are. And so
that's a little scary.
It is a little scary. And I think Lubbock would be wise to tap the brakes and just let's see how some of these data centers, what do they look like in 3 years? Are we going to look up and go, man, I wish we would have got on board earlier? Or are we going to look up and go, man, I'm sure glad we kind of stood on the sidelines and let this thing play out, because it could end quickly. They've already spent $200 billion in infrastructure, and that's all of that 200. They spent more than 200. I think they spent close to 300 or 400. But 200 billion of the money that data centers have invested in our country in data centers it's borrowed money.
Right.
So they're going to the bond market and buying and issuing bonds. So it's borrowed money. So they got to pay that money back. And so these data centers are flush with cash. They're throwing money around and all kinds of things. And at some point, they got to pay it back.
Right.
And they're estimating now that the revenue that's going to be generated from these data centers, right, because they're going to open these data centers and charge people to use ChatGPT or AI.
Right.
And so they're estimating that the revenue has got to be close to $5 to $6 trillion
wow.
generated revenue to pay these bonds back. And so I sure hope all this stuff works like these guys think it's going to, because otherwise some of these data centers will just close their doors and move on and default on these bonds and go on down the road. And, what does that do to our national economy?
Right. Well, and if you follow Trump's comments on data centers, he's certainly been clear. I think this week, or within the past week, heard him quoted saying data centers could effectively be bigger than oil. And you made that comparison. You made that comparison earlier, and he says Texas is missing out if they don't get on board with this. Other than the narrative that's changed that you mentioned with Governor Abbott taking a completely different. You said the script is flipped. With that, and then also the approach on incentives has completely changed. What other factors would you evaluate differently today than you would have 3 years ago if you're making the decisions
on data centers?
Yes, sir.
I would have some. I would probably require a lot more front end research and environmental impact and studies before they turn a shovel of dirt. Before you can do anything with a drilling site or even a building site, if you bought an old filling station and you came to me and said, "Hey, I want to get a loan, I want to make this into a bakery." Well, we're going to make you do a phase 1 environmental right out of the gate. Test what kind of pollutions are in the ground that this building sits on. And so we would look at that from the standpoint of what kind of quality of the ground is there, and there's all kinds of studies you're going to have to do. Well, these data centers are just showing up because they're in the county. They're not subject to some of these rules and regulations, particularly in Texas, and that's why you're seeing so many in Texas. And so I wish we could have tapped the brakes and done a little bit more impact studies on these data centers with these communities. We know what the numbers are going to do. The dollars are going to be great. But what's it going to do to our groundwater? What's it going to do to air quality? And they're moving so fast, they haven't had time to do those things. And so that's kind of what I would do.
So as I mentioned, when the dust settles, we're hopefully somebody's keeping up with it, and there'll be some sort of market study that can be learned from, so that 10 years from now, the community doesn't look completely different, and if it does, it would be in a good way.
That's the hope. I mean, the good news is, Taylor County, Shackelford County, Albany's going to have a bump in their tax revenue. As long as those dollars are put to good use for the community, and I'm sure they will, that's a positive. There's just so many unknowns, and of course, people got criticized for building the railroad across the country when they did all that, and so everybody's been saying that we're going to run out of water in West Texas, and oil's dried up in the Permian Basin, and then technology shows up, and now fracking, and so there's a lot of smart people involved in this data center business. Now they're talking about using some of this brown water that they use for fracking. Can they clean that and use that in these data centers? There's a lot of smart guys out there that are going to figure out how to use some of that water rather than having to use fresh water. And so, I think there's a lot of positives for it, and there's just a lot of unknowns that we just don't know what it's going to bring. But it's for Abilene. This economy has never seen this kind of activity, and energy and traffic and new people moving here, and we hadn't even talked about Dice Air Force Base, but they're expanding and growing and doing some things thanks to Jody Arrington. And so that just kind of adds to the level of complexity for this community.
More with James Arnold after the break. Stay with us.
Wake Up Call with Benji Snead continues on 92.3 The Hub, the voice for freedom.
Welcome back to the program. You're listening to the Wake Up Call. It's 8:20 a.m. Happy Tuesday, everybody. 79 degrees outside on our way to another hot day. High of 102 degrees. Thanks for joining the program this morning as we wrap up our conversation with Abilene banker James Arnold. Spent about 3 decades banking in Lubbock, so he's got a very, I would say, if not the most unique perspective to learn from is his observations, having been in Lubbock all that time and now in Abilene. We'll come back to wrap that conversation up in just a minute, James. But first, I want to ask you about a couple of other topical items, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Hadn't gotten your reaction to the Galaxy Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts?
Oh, I've got lots of thoughts. Disappointed that they dropped Jones. I mean, I get it. Ed Whitaker was running AT&T whenever they did Jones AT&T Stadium, and he made sure that, the Jones name was the lead name, Jones AT&T Stadium, and
right.
it just, I've always appreciated that he, of course, he was a Tech grad and alum,
Right.
but that he respected the history and tradition, and I just thought it kind of fell flat with me when they just named the student section the Jones student. I mean,
yeah,
whatever. But it is what it is. College athletics is in a weird spot. It's kind of the Wild West over there. There's no rules, and I get it. It's and Galaxy's trying to improve their image as a data center, and so I get it. I don't really like it, but it is what it is.
Speaking of the Wild West, data centers in the Wild West. It's almost like it's the only difference between the Wild West today and the Wild West is the gold is coming to us. We don't have to get out to California.
Yeah,
you've been involved politically over the years in different capacities. Obviously, you've more than likely seen the polls with Democrats making a run for several seats, not the least of which is a too close for comfort race with the governor. What do you think's driving this surge in highly contested races in Texas?
It's similar to this deal in Abilene. I told you about generational wealth being created. But then there's also people that are left on the sidelines. And so
right.
There seems to be a greater and greater divide between the haves and the have-nots. And I think,
interesting.
Social media continues to drive unrest. And, with algorithms and different weird things with technology, you're just seeing more unrest among our citizens and a divide among our citizens. And so, the days of me being someone who I might vote for a Democrat this time and a Republican next time, and I'm going to vote for the best candidate, that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, if you're a Republican, you are a bad person if you consider voting for a Democrat. And the same way for the Democrats, the voting. And so it's so polarized right now, and I don't know how we get back to something like the Bill Clinton, George Bush days. I don't know if we can ever get there. I wish we could.
Yeah.
And so I think you're seeing a growing unrest among people that have been on the sidelines for generations that are kind of tired of it. And then, of course, you've got these Republicans, there's no reason. The governor, I think he's going to win. It's closer than it probably should be, but he's going to win. The guy that's really in trouble is Paxton.
Yeah.
And I know lots of Republicans that are going to quietly go into that ballot box and not tell anybody who they voted for, but it ain't going to be him. And
that's secret
what
ballot,
got Trump
right?
elected the first time. People were like, "Oh, this guy's a clown," but they were going to vote for the other side, so they just quietly voted for Trump and didn't tell anybody. I think you're going to see a lot of that happen in this election, just because of I'm just not impressed with our Republican lineup this election cycle.
Right. Got it. We saw looked at 6 different polls yesterday.
I heard that.
They were split 3-3 with who was ahead, but Terralico was ahead by a bigger margin in the 3 polls where he led. And I think it's interesting, kind of laughable when you look at a 3, 4, 5 point poll difference, and then you got a 5% margin of error. So we could.
Well, I think when you look at the polls and you dissect it, people over 45 are trending more towards Paxton. People under 45 are trending Tallarico. People college educated are more trending towards Tallarico. It's fascinating, these blocks of people and groups that kind of trend one way or the other. kind of regardless of party affiliation. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. That's an interesting take. 45 and historically, 45 and under don't vote at a. That's what'll come down.
And that's what's gonna change the election is if those folks who typically don't vote, if they are that upset and go to vote with their feet and go do that, they could sway the election. But traditionally, they poll and then they never go vote.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Just because you take a poll doesn't mean you're going to go vote. It kind of reminds me of what happened with George H.W. Bush and Clinton when he went after that MTV crowd, rock the vote sort of thing. He got a whole new group of voters to come out, and that's a smart strategy. Well, thanks for your take on that. Back to data centers. We've got about 3 minutes left. What would you say is the most overhyped economic benefit right now in Abilene in regards to data centers?
Oh, the most overhyped?
Yeah.
I think the labor cost has not really gone, just the hourly guy that's driving the truck, those guys are still, they're getting paid, but they're not really getting paid like the business owners are. It's not trickling down to the workers, to the labor force.
That's notable.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Let me ask you in terms of banking. So we had Senator Perry on last week. And he had a real interesting take on what he would like to see. I think he unpacked like 4 things that are must-haves or must-dos versus must-considers. And one of them was they should bring their own capital as opposed to I don't know what the difference is. I think if it's a $1 billion deal, I think you're borrowing the money from somewhere. But are you guys making loans to some of these data centers, or where are they getting their capital?
Wall Street.
Okay.
They're getting it from Wall Street, and Wall Street's sure to loaning the money, and they're issuing these investment grade bonds to these guys, and they're pushing as much money across the table as those guys can step in their pockets, and so it makes me nervous because the money's flowing freely, and at some point there's going to be a day of reckoning, and they got to start paying it back. But these politicians, what frustrates me is the time for these guys to start making news and headlines and talking tough with these data centers is gone.
Right.
The cat's out. I mean, the cat's out of the barrel. The cat's whatever you want to say it. It's already happening. Their time to do their work is past, and so now they're playing catch up and they're talking tough and all this business. It's too late for these guys. They had their chance 2 years ago, and they were like, "Oh, bring it on."
Yeah.
Well, now they're going, "Well, time out. Well, too late, guys. There's 300 of them on the ground and already operating."
Right.
So your time to make a difference is past. Right. That's what's frustrating with this.
Got 1 more minute left. Last question, James. How much is too much? Have you seen any criteria on how many we would take before we close it off?
No, and you don't know till you know, right? And it's like who's going to build the last house that creates an oversupply? There's going to be somebody that's going to be the last one to the party, and it's going to start the tipping point of we've overbuilt on data centers.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that number is, but it sure seems like we're getting there.
James, thanks for joining us today. We're up against a hard break. We'll be back.
Thanks, Benji.